Hey, do me a favor and take a second right now to just feel your pulse. Grab your wrist or maybe your neck and just find that rhythm. Ba-bum, ba-bum. Feels pretty simple, right? It's just this steady, rhythmic thumping hanging out in the background of your life. But, well, what you're actually feeling is an absolute masterpiece of biological engineering. Welcome to this explainer where we're going to take a slow-motion dive into the incredible precision of a single heartbeat. We're going to break down the exact sequence of events that keeps you alive, literally moment by moment, day after day.
So here's the totally mind-boggling premise of our journey today. 0.8. That's it. Just 0.8 seconds. In that tiny, literally fleeting fraction of a second, your heart pulls off this complete, perfectly timed sequence of electrical, mechanical, and auditory events. It's like this highly coordinated, high-speed dance of valves snapping shut, muscle fibers twisting, and pressure building up to explosive levels. And the crazy part? It does the whole shebang in less than a second, and then immediately resets to do it all over again.
Okay, let's dive into this, because how your heart actually allocates that tiny sliver of time is absolutely fascinating. This 1.8-second window isn't just one continuous, blurry action, it's sharply divided into two main phases. First up, we've got ventricular systole, which takes up a mere 0.3 seconds. This right here is the big high-pressure squeeze. Then we have ventricular diastole taking up the remaining 0.5 seconds, which is a surprisingly complex refill phase.
Here's our quick roadmap for decoding this rapid-fire process. First, we'll look at the overarching 0.8-second cycle. Second, systole, the big squeeze. Third, diastole, the refill phase. And finally, we'll decode the heart sounds.
All right, section 1, the 0.8-second cycle. To really appreciate what's happening inside your chest right this very second, we kind of need to artificially slow down time.
I absolutely love this definition from our source material. It says, the cardiac cycle is a precisely timed sequence of electrical and mechanical events lasting approximately 0.8 seconds. Honestly, that phrase, precisely timed, is everything here. There is literally no room for error. And what's really amazing is that we can actually chart this incredibly rapid journey without even looking inside the body. How? Well, the heart sounds themselves serve as our primary clinical markers. Every little sound acts like a timestamp for a massive mechanical action.
Moving on to section 2, systole, the big squeeze. Let's look at the rising action of our narrative here. This is a violently fast 0.3-second window, where tension rapidly builds inside the heart chambers and blood is forcefully ejected out to the rest of your body.
So systole kicks off with what is essentially the ultimate pressure cooker moment. We call this isovolumetric contraction. Here's what's going down. Right at the end of the atria contracting, the pressure in the ventricles suddenly shoots up past the pressure in the atria sitting above them. This causes the atrioventricular, or AV valves, to just snap shut. And actually, that closure is what gives us the first heart sound, the famous S1. But right after S1, the ventricles start squeezing with all their valves tightly closed, so the volume of blood isn't changing just yet. But the pressure? It skyrockets incredibly fast before a single drop of blood even moves. And then, once that ventricular pressure finally overcomes the pressure sitting out there in the aorta and the pulmonary artery, boom, the barrier breaks. The semilunar valves blast open. This triggers the next phase, rapid ejection. It is this forceful initial expulsion of blood right out of the heart. But, it doesn't stay rapid for that whole 0.3 seconds. As the pressures in those great vessels rise from all that new blood rushing in, the flow naturally starts to slow down. It transitions seamlessly into what we call reduced ejection. Now, under normal circumstances, this explosive ejection phase is totally silent. But it isn't always. If a doctor is listening during this specific window of systole and hears what we call an ejection click, well, that immediately changes the picture. An ejection click is a major diagnostic indicator that there's an underlying structural pathology going on, usually involving the valves or the vascular system. It's literally the sound of the biological machinery catching under that immense pressure.
All right, section 3, diastole, the refill phase. After that violent squeeze, the pressure finally drops and we move into the climax and falling action of our 0.8-second story, ventricular diastole. This is the 0.5-second refill phase, and let me tell you, it's a whole lot more dynamic than just a simple relaxation.
Diastole actually begins with this fascinating little crossover point called protodiastole. As the ventricles relax, their internal pressure drops below the pressure of the arterial blood they literally just pumped out.
But here's the catch. The valves don't close instantly. There's this incredibly brief, specialized moment referred to as the hangout interval. I love that term. It's this tiny hesitation right before the higher arterial pressure finally forces those semilunar valves to snap shut, effectively sealing the exit doors.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we can directly compare the mechanics of that classic lub-dub sound right here. The lub, or S1, is those AV valves closing at the start of the systolic squeeze. The dub, or S2, is the semilunar valve snapping shut at the start of the diastolic refill we just talked about. But get this, S2 actually has two distinct parts, an aortic component we call A2 and a pulmonary component called P2. Normally, A2 happens just slightly before P2. Why? Well, because there's lower resistance in your pulmonary system. So the pulmonary valve kind of hangs out just a fraction of a millisecond longer before finally closing.
So, with the exit doors firmly closed, the complex refill sequence begins. First up, we've got isovolumetric relaxation. All the valves are closed, and the ventricular pressure just plummets rapidly. Now, if the AV valves happen to be stiff or stenosed, they might actually produce an opening snap sound as they're finally forced open. Once they do open, we enter rapid filling, which is followed by a slower period called reduced filling, or diastasis. And finally, the atria give one last active squeeze, that's atrial systole, to sort of top off the tank before the whole 0.8-second cycle restarts. But take a look at this mechanical reality, because it is truly surprising. You might naturally think the heart has to aggressively pump blood into the ventricles to refill them, right? Actually, not at all. A massive 70% of the blood just effortlessly falls into the ventricles entirely passively during that rapid filling phase. Only the final 30% requires any active filling through that atrial contraction right at the very end of diastole. Honestly, it is just an incredibly efficient system. Which brings us to Section 4, decoding the heart sounds. We've mapped out the mechanical forces and the pressures. Now, let's transition into our final resolution and tie all of these invisible, lightning-fast mechanics back to the actual acoustic sounds a doctor hears through a stethoscope.
So, the crucial point is that alterations in the timing or the intensity of these sounds act like distinct acoustic alarms. Take S1, the first heart sound. Its intensity relies entirely on how fast the ventricle contracts and exactly where those valve leaflets are positioned at the end of diastole. Or consider the S2 sound. Like we said, A2 normally precedes P2, but if that splitting becomes too wide or fixed, well, it can reveal electrical delays like a right bundle branch block, or even mechanical issues like septal defects that are actively altering those valve closure times.
And this brilliantly illustrates how extra sounds map perfectly to moments of mechanical stress or failure. Just look at this breakdown. If a doctor hears a third heart sound, or S3, it happens during that 70% rapid filling phase we discussed. It usually indicates a highly compliant or overfilled ventricle, something we often call a ventricular gallop. Now, a fourth heart sound, S4, happens during atrial systole, signaling that the atria are desperately contracting against a stiff, non-compliant ventricle. That's an atrial gallop. We even have highly specific, kind of crazy sounding things like pericardial knocks in early diastole or tumor plops in mid-diastole. Every single unique sound pinpoints a precise pathological interruption within that standard 0.8-second cycle. From the violent pressure spikes of isovolumetric contraction to the passive, effortless refill of diastole, every single phase is heavily documented by its own acoustic signature. It's truly a masterpiece of biology. So I'm going to leave you with this thought as you feel your pulse one more time. How many perfectly engineered 0.8-second cycles has your heart completed today? Just silently and flawlessly managing these immense mechanical forces without you ever having to even think about it. It really makes you wonder what other incredible systems are running in the background right now, doesn't it? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.